Welcome everyone. Today we're going to be interviewing Crispin Sonn. Thank you, Crispin, for joining us. Crispin has served on many boards, many organizations, spent several years with the Dalton Mutual Group in senior positions, and holds a BA in social science from the University of Cape Town, and business administration from Stellenbosch University, AMP, Advanced Management Program from Harvard University, and then also currently Director of Comedo Investment Group.
That's right.
I'm probably missed a few, but I know
That's
accolades
good.
are not that important.
You've covered important ones.
But I mean, I know accolades.
And I have 4 children.
4 children, but I was going to ask you that now. So, all the accolades, I know you've done so much, but tell me a bit about Crispin. What gets you up in the morning? I know you like your coffee. What gets you up in the morning? What keeps you going?
You know, it sounds like such a cliche these days, but I like making things just a little bit better, than what I find it, whether it be my garden, whether it be my house, my friends. They started nicknaming me Chrispen the Builder.
Okay.
Because I've always got a project going. I'm always looking at something and saying, that could be a little bit better. We could fix that. That could look better. That could be nicer. So I like kind of making things a little better and nicer. And it's always consuming my mind. And I think that also applies to pretty much everything, the country, the businesses we in, and effectively, I think you and I have spoken about this before, business is effectively about solving problems, and you solve problems using the most available techniques, technology, and ideas. And so it's always dynamic, because the problem may be age-old, but you now have new tools every time at your disposal to apply to the problem. You now ask me what gets me up in the morning.
Clearly solving.
That's what puts me to sleep at night when I go put my head on the pillow, the things I'm thinking through. And in the morning, I try to start most of my mornings very calmly. I try not to rush. I try to
ease into the
day, because the day develops a momentum of its own very quickly.
Something that's come through strongly with you is your strong emphasis on social issues. So you're very successful in business, in corporate, but then there's this narrative of social issues, wanting to fix things. Where did this narrative come from for Crispin?
I don't know, my parents often said I was the guy, I was not having fun on the soccer field because I was herding all my cousins. I was always making sure they're always okay. I was always making sure, are they okay? Are they excluded? Are they in the game? Are they eating? So I don't know, maybe it's a DNA thing, because I think I come from a family, maternal and paternal, who were initially teachers but servants. My grandfather's paternal grandfather, Pat Sonn, was very involved in our church. He was a school principal. In those days, school principals were still meneer. Everywhere they wore a hat, a jacket, and sometimes a waistcoat. And so there were servants in the community. My maternal grandfather was also a school principal at a farm school out in George. And so I guess I just, by observation, learned that this is kind of how life works. You've got to make the best of your own life, but it is quite meaningless if you aren't able to touch and advance the lives of other people. And so that was just kind of my visual cues. And my father built a trade union, teachers union, built a fantastic campus, what was then the Peninsula Technikon, and then ventured into business. And it was always about serving others. And our slogan in the organization, which is not a new slogan, but we've adopted, is do well, do good, or do good, do well, So you can't do good if you're not doing well, And so that was just my visual cues that I got from people around me, and I guess that's how I got socialized.
You took that through your corporate career.
And one of the things I'm really proud of is I've been chairman for 15 years of an organization called Food Forward South Africa. Yes. And we currently serve 980,000 people a day around the country. We feed 980,000 people a day. We've got about 36 trucks on the road, and we move just under 30,000 tons of food a year. And we do that at a cost of 36 cents a meal. And a meal is a 250-gram meal to each individual. And the logic for me was, I'm unfortunately not the kind of guy, I'm not comfortable in doing soup kitchens. There are people who are really good at it. It's not, I'd be thumbs and I'll be a mess in serving. And then my mind was, how do I work with organizations where we make the system work better? The system then works better.
So sustainability you're looking for.
Sustainability. Yeah. And I can achieve and work through my efforts, not only mine, we've got a phenomenal managing director, Andy Duplessis, and a fabulous board. But how am I involved in an organization that makes the system work better to serve more people? And there are people, so we work with 3,000 beneficiary organizations who do the soup kitchens, and they're very good at doing that. Sure. But my skill set is different. So how do I apply that skill set through an organization to achieve a better outcome? And so I guess as much as I want to serve, I've also had to start thinking, where am I best deployed? Efficiently with my skills to make an exponential difference versus just the one person. And work with people who have the empathy, the insight, the time, the aptitude to work in that community. How do I work with them? And this is kind of more and more in the arts. I'm involved with Klein Karoo Nasionale Kunstef as the chair. How do I use artists? How do I use organizations to enable more artists as opposed to just working with one?
You spoke about system there. I heard you speak once about, what was the term you used? Birthright lottery. And I think you were talking about the educational system, talk about system now, and you're referring to the average student in a middle class sort of background versus the real whiz kid in a poverty-stricken area. Can you share a bit about that? I was fascinated by that analogy.
Look, it is something that bothers me, and I'm really concerned at a human level and at a political and a socio-political and economic level for the future. But the idea was actually not my idea, but what I read, Warren Buffett from Berkshire Hathaway. One day at his annual general meeting said, in his true humble self, he said he was very lucky because he won the birth lottery. And what that meant is he was born a white male in the post-World War II era in America. So he landed in a place where there was a massive reinvestment in the US economy. He had a really good family upbringing, and he had opportunity. So he was just at the right place. Now, in his humility, it was Warren Buffett. So he's a clever person endowed with all the right skills and value, but he landed at the right place. And that got me thinking that in an educational system, you could have kids who are fairly good and maybe average or a little bit above average who go to an exceptional school. And them, by virtue of their parents being able to extend that privilege to them, they do okay in life. They don't have to worry about eating dog biscuits in retirement. They're kind of on an okay trajectory. And then you get a kid who is exceptional, but he sits and he lands in a very bad educational system. And irrespective of how gifted he is, he's just stunted because of the space he's in. And that perpetuates the inequality. So the guy who comes through a fantastic educational or private education system, if he's exceptional, he will rise because the system in line. But if he's average, he'll also be okay. But the person who gets into a system that's not working would become incredibly frustrated because he or she may become so frustrated that she'll seek other places to deploy that skill, whether it be crime or whether it be on a path of self-destruction. And then if you play that forward we're going to end up we're not going to be there. We're going to have a massive class discrepancy in South Africa.
Class
with
warfare, you call this.
class warfare, and this inequality will just grow. And people will become frustrated, as they are now, because they know they're capable of more, but the system is geared against them. And that, I think, is my frustration about our South African system. It should provide a much better basic education system across the board for more people. And private schools and stuff should be the exception. Now it's becoming, unfortunately, the norm. In our business, we take long-term views on things. We don't have a short-term view, so we invest for the long term. So we do think, how is this going to play out in 10 years? How is this going to play out in 15? Where are we going to get the skills? What's the social environment we're going to be invested in? And so that's why we're forced to think about these things.
You talk about that. We did some work with a school in Gugulethu. We spent some time with the principal, and he was saying to us that he's trying to drive maths and science in his school because the surrounding schools, they're just keeping the kids away from maths and science because they want to get their pass rates up. So the matric results, okay, now listen, look at our pass rate, but nobody's doing maths and science. And he was saying he has to kick against the system just to get maths and science students coming through. So we went to the school, we went to the awards day, and the kids are so excited to give it a go because of that environment. Now he's kicking against the system. The other schools in the surrounding areas actually upset for what he's doing. And so there you can see that issue again. No, don't do maths and science. Just pass. Just get through. Yeah. And that's it's perpetuating the cycle.
I mean, there's a thing in organizations, business, however you want to put it. Be careful what you measure. Because you'll get the result that you measure. So if your measurement is pass rate, you're going to get pass rates. Because the incentives are all geared around pass, not the quality or the content of the pass. So when you look at metrics, measurement metrics, you must be very, and this is, I think, the true test of leadership is to figure out and to work out what are the likely unintended consequences of this. And when you set those things, you can do it the lazy way. And the lazy way is go for the obvious result. The obvious result is pass rate. Now look at South Africa at the moment. Everyone is celebrating pass rates. I think the Free State Education Department did exceptionally well on the pass rate. But the throughput rate is not great. So in other words, the dropout rate. So what happens in schools? By grade 9, 10, 11, they hold kids back or they force them out of the system because they're going to impact their pass rate. Now, I'm involved in a school and I'm chairman of the governing body. And one of the academic staff, one of the faculties told me, every time somebody drops out of the system, they're regarded as a failure because their job is to nurture that child through the whole process. And if there are problems and you need to hold the kid back, which the schools do, and there's good reason for it, it's your job to use that year to nurture her or him and take them through the system. And so I think we're facing a massive calamity when it comes to education because we're focusing on pass and not on the quality. And when you deal with math and science, it's a complex issue because the poor principals don't often have the skills and the tools, and skills being the teachers, and tools to help kids. And kids are socialized around maths and science very poorly. The household doesn't place value on it. So the school has to do all the work. And that becomes a real challenge in the education system.
Let me swing this way quickly. Is there a tension between profit and employee well-being in a corporate space? So I just want to lift up the stakes a bit. Is there a tension between free capital and social issues? Is there a tension? Should there be a tension? Can it be managed?
Yeah. No, look, I was on record a few years ago, I think during my business meets government debate, where I said to the audience, and the reason I'm quoting it is because I've had to rethink my position on that because I think the world has changed. But at that time, I often said capital is agnostic. Capital follows opportunity where it can replicate itself as quickly as possible with the least amount of risk. So it will see an opportunity in coffee and it will look and it will go and it will say the opportunity for today is in Kenya and it will go there. And it would want to have least amount of risk, so it will look for the opportunity and it will look to replicate itself. So the tension there is they want to keep costs down and they want to keep profits up and they want a return on capital that exceeds anything else they can put their money in. That means from an employee point of view, the old model, suppress any cost, so get your labor as cheaply as you can, give the people as little as you need to just make them work and survive, and then maximize your profits so that your return on capital and your return to your shareholders is considerably above average. That's the old model. What is changing and has changed in the world is that investors don't get money, it's not their money, they often get it from people like you and I. And we start thinking, but that's wrong. So we put pressure on the funds, and we said we won't. And pension funds have been big leaders in this. We're not going to put our money here if you are exploitative. And it started in the old days where the old model is where people wouldn't invest in gaming or in harmful products. Arms, casinos, sex, or anything that was related that could be regarded as harmful in society. And then that grew. So I think where we are now is in institutional markets, for sure. It's not as agnostic anymore. Coal, for example, is struggling to attract fresh capital because people want to invest in non-fossil fuels or things that don't harm the planet. That's institutional investors. But then, of course, the institutions have a certain set of governance, ethics, values, and principles. But then you have unscrupulous private investors, and that opens a market who really don't care. They want a quick return on capital, and they'll go where the opportunity. And it's legal. It's not illegal to invest in tobacco, for that matter, in alcohol, or in coal. It's not illegal to invest in coal. So it opens the market, and those people now are drawn to those type of investments. And I think over time, that will change. But it takes a long time for those ethics and values to become universal.
I heard you once say that we in a crisis or we heading for a crisis as a country. The solution cannot be academic anymore or theoretical. We need to come up with hardcore practical solutions. And you mentioned the importance of partnership between civil, public, and private sort of spheres. Where are we at as a country right now? Are we in a crisis already? And talk to me a bit about that solution.
Sure. No, I think we are in a crisis, and I think it generally is a leadership crisis. Without exception, I don't think there are politicians who hold out a vision. The Bible talks about where there's no vision, the people perish. You start with vision, so when you talk to people in an organization, your whole thing is to align them around a common objective and a common goal. And they must believe in the goal to the extent that they see themselves in that vision and how it benefits them to be part of that vision. You can't have in an organization, some people think they're going to do okay, other people not, because that dissonance eventually disrupts an organization just too much. So South Africa has been significantly disrupted for a couple of reasons. There isn't a vision. The president doesn't hold forth on a vision. When I turn on the television and I listen, it's a lot of words, but I don't walk away going, wow, we are on a track for an inclusive, non-racial, non-sexist, democratic South Africa, where there's a place for anyone who's willing to apply themselves.
Which we thought post-94 was the vision.
That was
That's
our
what we
rallying,
thought, yeah.
our rallying cry. I was in the youth movement.
Yeah.
Our rallying cry was forward to a non-racial, non-sexist, democratic South Africa. That was the simple slogan. 30 years on, don't see that. We actually are more polarized. You're having people mobilizing around ethnicity and race, not holding forth on a common vision, and where anybody, irrespective of their background, religious persuasion, race, can say, yeah, I like that. I'm part of that. I can see my children as part of that. So I think that's our first crisis. You and I spoke before about values. Values is, it must be written up and people must know it and learn it. But when somebody spends 3 or 4 days in an organization, the test must be to put them in front of a whiteboard and say, what did you observe here? What are the values of this organization? Because it's evident around you. When a tourist comes to South Africa, they must say, what's the values? What's the common values people are pursuing? So that's our first crisis. We don't have that. The Constitution is a fantastic piece of paper. I've got the preamble above my desk at my home office. And the Constitution is phenomenal, and it talks about a really incredible vision for the country, but it's not being executed. Crisis 1. Crisis 2 is that people are looking to mobilize themselves into groups to influence government to serve them better than they feel they're being serviced, but at the expense of someone else. Now, that's not a nation. That's a conglomeration of different interests. And then thirdly, at Harvard, there's a professor called Professor Dick Vitio. And Vitio is an economics professor, and he writes the case studies. So Harvard's big model, learning model, is they started the case study model. So you, through the MBA, all the executive programs, you get a case study, you study it, and the case study deals with the socio-political issues, the economics, the finances, all of those things. We did a case study on South Africa, and they say South Africa is phenomenal in blueprints and in plans. And the depth and the thought of our development plan, whether it be GEAR, whether it be RDP, or whether it be the NDP, the National Development Plan, phenomenal. South Africa rates 2 out of 5 on its ability to execute any of those plans. So coming to your point of practicality, leaders must have a plan, but people must feel the benefit of that plan day in, day out. They must see progress. They must see that they don't have to queue for a taxi because they've got a choice, the taxi, the bus, or the train. There must be competition. The taxis can't monopolize it. The people must have the choice. People must be able to get to work. They must know that they've invested this in themselves to learn a skill. And they apply that skill, their life will be better. That was the old American dream is dead, but the American dream was that if I become a steel worker and I go on 3 courses and I do this, my life will be better because there's a demand for the skill and I can apply the skill and do better for me and my family. That's virtuous. We don't have that virtuous model in South Africa. You have graduates who are unemployed. That is demoralizing for not only the graduate, but the family. So they lose faith in the education system. They lose faith in, why is gangsterism so rife? Because there are neighborhoods in the Western Cape where probably the biggest employers are gangs. Because it's the quickest way to wealth. And then they have a ook walking in the morning from 6 o'clock to the bus to catch the bus out of Hanover Park to UWC, and they all laugh at him. And then he graduates and he can't get a job. And they say, waar gaat sy? Sy stap nie met jou boeke die afgelope paar jaar. Sy het nou 'n graad, sy het 'n honors, and they driving around in a fancy bakkie, BMW, whatever, wearing the latest tackies. That's when society starts becoming unhinged. And that's the extent of our crisis, and we don't have leadership.
So when you talk about now the three spheres, you're talking about the civil society, public space, and then the private space. You're saying there needs to be partnership and collaboration there. But you cannot have collaboration if your leaders in each sphere there's conflicting interests and they're not leaders. So how are you going to get that right?
So I'm going to make the statement that I really think I was equally critical of myself and my colleagues and people way above me in the business sector. So when I spoke of business has been complicit in our crisis for a long time. We had, I think, 14 consecutive quarters of growth in the Thabo Mbeki administration above 4.5%, and our labor absorption rate did not reflect that. And business maximized profits and tried to manage their risk. They spent a lot of time fighting regulations rather than working within the government framework. And government has a very blunt tool. If they don't get the outcome, they regulate. They set rules. You don't need the rules if we're all doing the same thing. If you live in a house and everyone's slovenly, then I set rules in my house. You will not leave a dirty cup on the counter. But I didn't need that rule. If there's never a need for dirty cups on the counter before we go to bed, that rule is not needed. Government has rules, and it's a blunt instrument. But if we all align and we say, listen, and I think business has gotten there, but I think government the relationship is broken for a whole host of reasons, and governments become corrupted by individuals who are self-serving as opposed to now wanting to meet business where business should have been a long time ago. And so why? Government doesn't create jobs. Private sector creates jobs. Government creates the environment, the space. It reduces friction on bureaucracy, on legislation, and it taxes people and deploys the tax into a way that's good for society, including business. And there must be a sense that when the taxes are deployed, we mustn't second guess. We must know they're deploying it in the right way so we don't begrudge the tax. It's not being stolen. And then we invest in capital. And we invest in business. We deploy our capital and we create opportunity. And when that works, it's a beautiful system. And then when it works well, foreign direct investment come here because they go, the return we get on our capital relative to the risk, this is the place to be. It's as simple as that. But it starts again with government leadership, and it starts with bold statesman business people. And I call them statesman's business. When you lead a big organization like Old Mutual, like Sanlam, like Standard Bank, like ABSA, you do not have the luxury. You do not, and I must contain myself here, the luxury to only think of the maximization of your shareholder profit. You have the obligation to contribute to the system because it's that system that feeds you. You are a 170-year-old organization and you have to hope that you're going to be around for another 100 years. So you don't have the luxury of thinking parochially. So you have to be a statesman. You have to invest in initiatives that makes the system work better, from which you feed. And that's where shareholders, policyholders get value. If the leaders are not doing that, you mustn't buy the product. Don't buy the product. If you don't see that, boycott them. And I think there's a way now of consumer activism. Young people have tools at their disposal to assess it, to share information, like you doing, to share insights. And so the chickens will come home to roost for people who don't do that.
I was thinking about, I was listening to this old tape recently, and they were speaking about the English prior 1939, and Churchill was warning them, listen, Hitler's coming. This was 1937. The English didn't want to listen. They wanted their comforts, they wanted their excesses, and they put their head in the sand because they wanted this comfort and this life that they had, and they wouldn't hear the call that it's a crisis. Obviously, we know what happens afterwards. Do you think that as a nation and our leadership, we got to get our head out of the sand because almost doomsday is coming? And I'm going to balance that with something you said before, but it's that serious that we got to get our head out of the sand here.
I honestly think South Africans are beginning to, their heads are out of the sand.
Okay.
And their eyes are wide open. And you're seeing the whites of their eyes at the moment.
So that's a good sign.
That's a good sign. The problem is it too late? Because you know, in any organization, and you've been involved in organizations, there comes a point where there's been so much degradation that the muscle, it's no more fat that's gone, the muscle and the structure is broken. I don't think we're there. And so let me say, I think we are in a crisis, but I'm mildly optimistic. I used to be very optimistic even 2 years ago. Now I'm kind of mildly optimistic for a few reasons. And this is a bold statement. 36 months under the right leadership will fix South Africa. And let me explain to you why. We probably won't fix the likes of a Transnet and the SOEs and all of those. Those are bigger systemic things. But South Africa has the enabling legislation, very progressive legislation, that allows us to do the things that are necessary. It's got an independent judiciary. It's got a set of commercial principles. If you look at the Companies Act and its amendments, if you look even at the BEE codes, now a lot of white businesses regard BEE as a tax. And they regard it as a tax because they feel they're paying for something they shouldn't be paying for. And even the progression of that legislation has happened because the state hasn't seen the benefit of it to society. And as I said to you earlier, the only way the state can respond is through legislation. But I have a strong sense that there are clever enough legislators still who believe that if they can get the result, they will amend the legislation to get the outcome because they know legislation is a blunt instrument. So my sense is that we've got the ability, the infrastructure. We are slipping on infrastructure. Transnet is the most recent case. But we've got enabling legislation. And I have a belief, I travel a fair amount, that there's a South African diaspora who want to be here. They want to be here, but they want to be safe. We've got to sort out crime. And it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation because if you create economic opportunity and people have an alternative to a criminal life, crime will dissipate. Policing is also a blunt instrument. You can't just throw 1 million people in a van. You've got to change their conditions so that they're not 1 million people to be thrown in a van, but 100 people. So when you attract the diaspora, I think that starts changing. And there we've got draconian, stupid, populist legislation around visas. Everyone says keep the foreigners out, but guess what? They come with money. They create entrepreneurial opportunities. They take risks that South Africans aren't prepared to take risks because they come from a worse environment. So this is a step up for them, and that becomes virtuous in a society. So xenophobia is actually a really stupid political philosophy. So if you're telling me are we in a crisis, yes, but I must caveat it with I'm hopeful. And I also think the 29th of May will show, I think it's going to shake things up. There's going to
Probably
be
the most important election since '94.
Probably. Yeah. We thought the previous one was, this is it. Mm. And I really think it's going to shake things up. So where I think things are going to go, my own opinion. So I think what's going to happen is we're going to see a shake-up in 29. We're going to see a widening of the eyes of political leadership. Daily Maverick had a fantastic article yesterday about leaders under 43 in the various parties. do yourself a favor and go and look through there. There are young, I'm an old Bali. There are young people in there who are coming through with incredible vision. So I think we're actually seeing political skeptics, young skeptics stepping forward and saying, hello, my future depends on politics. Politics is important because you only change things without a coup. The only way, non-violent way to change a system is through political participation in a democratic system. And I think young people are beginning to realize that, and that excites me the most.
Actually, and that's why I said I want to be balanced, because I've heard you say in an interview, despite all of that, our nation has hope still. Despite everything, there's hope still. And I think just maybe, probably we're going to come to the end now, where I'm going to ask you to encourage leaders and business people and all classes of society. Encourage us around these things about our nation.
Look, a system only works as well as the way people use the system. So if you're an employee in an organization, the first thing is you have to ask yourself is this the place I want to be? Does it talk to my values? You and I have spoken about that before. Does it work for me? So then you're using the system because you're saying, yeah, I like this. Then the second thing is, as long as these values apply, I want to be here. And I'm going to hold people accountable to those values, no matter who they are. So if there's these wonderful town hall meetings in an organization and a lot of talking heads up there, I'm going to grab the mic. And I'm going to say, how is it possible that you give me all these lovely motherhood and apple pie statements, but you do this? That's inconsistent with our values. Because that is like democracy. I'm using the system and the freedoms within that system to make the system work and to keep it alive. That, I think, is slowly, sadly slowly, but slowly beginning to happen in South Africa. And the amount of people who rock up at the polls will be an indication of that for us. And then the third thing we are really, and so I want to encourage people to make their voices heard. When you don't vote and participate, the danger of that is you're not in the game. You can't affect change. So the only other way is you can burn tires and burn buildings to be heard. So it's dangerous when you're not participating in the system because you're basically saying, I don't trust the system. And I think we still have a system that works marginally, but works. The IEC is critical and its integrity is critical to our democracy. Because if we're in the system, we can effect change in a peaceful, democratic way. I think we have that. Relative to other countries around the world, we have it. We cannot have another 5 years of what we've had before. We won't survive as a nation. Not economically we will. Society will be beyond the point of recovery. Too many people will lose faith in the system and they'll revert to alternate means to make a living or to have their voices heard, and we'll be in a state of fighting and chaos.
The honest feedback is so important. It's an honest assessment, but there's hope.
Thank you.
South Africans are resilient people, so there is hope, but we've got to keep our eyes open, like you said.
And I want to thank you, and you. I want to thank you for the work you do, because we need to have these conversations. We need to get it out in an honest, clear manner. And if I may say this, guys, let's stop the praise singing. I was at an event in Joburg last week where there was so much praise singing. And, we're the greatest. We're not the greatest nation anymore. We're not the country we think we are. We're not. We are potentially that country. We're not it. And the only way we fix it is by facing the hard realities and figuring out what we can do each day a little bit to make it better, where we started the conversation. How do we get actively involved in, whether it be picking up a paper and making sure your block is tidy, just the neighborhood you live in, just the neighborhood, so that the kids who go to school have a different example, have a different model. That's making it better. That's picking up the paper on your way to the bus stop, putting it in a black bag and throwing it in the bin. Make it better. Get involved in the school committee, not for your own gain or your child's gain, but to make it better for more people. If we all do that little bit, sticky for sticky, then we're on the right trajectory. We cannot abandon. We have a responsibility. We can't just keep putting our finger in people's faces.
That was fascinating, and I think for all of us, everybody has a part to play. Whatever spheres that you find yourselves in, you all have a part to play. So thank you again for joining us, and remember, here at 360 Consulting, we are relational and not transactional. Thank you.